Hey guys, I'm Prodigy from Kilo23. Welcome back. I've been trying to film this video for at least a week now. I've gotten a lot of it done. I was able to do the internal stuff because obviously inside my place is a lot quieter than outside, and the weather never changes in there. It's always a constant 70 or 72 degrees. You come out here and you try to film the other parts, and it's a pain. The other day I had some guy with a bandsaw a few hundred feet away. He just wouldn't shut it off, so I couldn't really film. My mic would pick it up no matter what. Then it started raining, and then the sun went away and all that bad stuff. And now I'm out here today. It's a little overcast. It's a little chilly, 40, 45 degrees. Not the warmest weather in the world, but obviously I'm not going to shiver like crazy. But this video, I've been wanting to make it for a couple of months now, and I'm finally able to do it. I got the camera I wanted. Still working on getting the mic, but right now I'm actually using, I'm going to look at this other camera here. I'm using my old mic, which is hooked up to my old camera here, and I'm going to have to splice the audio over, so it's got a little bit better audio. So if I take my new Sony camera outside with the mic, it sounds pretty tacky and awful, and it picks up a lot of extra noise I really don't want it to. So I've got to kind of do a little bit of post-editing, which takes more time. So hopefully I'll have this up pretty quick. Now ultimately it's up to you guys to decide which gun is better. This is going to be a longer video, a lot of information in it. I want to give you guys the tools and the information to decide which gun is best for you. Now the first gun we'll be talking about today is the Echo 1 Genesis M4. Echo 1 makes 3 models of this. This is kind of their regular, normal, standard model, the 14.5-inch barrel, the regular handguard. Their other 2 models are the Commando model, which has the short barrel, and the kind of medium-length handguard, which has the same length barrel. All 3 run about $100, $135, not super expensive. They're all going to include the major things you need to get out on the field and play, minus ammo and eye protection, of course. It's going to come with your cleaning rod, which every single gun in the world should come with that, except 1 or 2 I've seen. It's going to come with a 300-round high-capacity magazine, as well as a 9.6-volt nunchuck battery, which is going to fit in the stock. And we'll talk about battery compartments later on in the video. And it's also going to come with a basic wall charger. This is everything you guys really need to get out on the field and start playing right away without having to spend more money just to see if airsoft is your thing or not. This is also a great option as a loaner gun. It's not very expensive. It already comes with the battery, charger, magazine, everything your friend needs except iPro and ammo to get out on the field and start playing and see if airsoft is really right for them. Now the second gun I have today is the G&G Combat Machine. Now G&G, like Samsung, makes a ton of models of everything imaginable. This is no different. You've got black, tanned, pink, white colors. You've got blowback, non-blowback. You've got metal body. You've got their polymer plastic bodies. You've got rail systems. You've got long barrel. You've got short barrel. You've got crane stock. You've got LE stock. You've got this and that and all kinds of different things. And then you've got the custom ones that Evike and all these other companies do on top of that. There's just a lot of versions of this out there. So I guarantee there's one out there you'll like. This is the basic model. It's $140, $150, non-blowback, wired to the front handguard, plastic polymer body, the most basic G&G combat machine you can get and the least expensive. Now, it's pretty much on par with our Echo 1 as far as price. It costs maybe $15 more at the most. Like I said, retails about $140, $150. Now the G&G will not include quite as much as the Echo 1, but it's still a good package. You get a 450 round high capacity mag, which is a little bit more than the Echo 1 by about 100, 150 rounds depending. It'll also come with a bag of actually pretty good G&G quality ammo, about 1,000 rounds. That'll last you a couple mags in this gun, which is enough to make sure your gun works well, break it in, things like that. Now the downside to getting this package is it doesn't include a battery and a charger, but you can get packages out there, depending on the website you buy it on, that come with that. Usually it's like a website special or something. And those tend to cost a little bit more, like $170 to $190, depending on the model you get. So, in theory, you should have to buy your own battery and charger with this, which can cost up to $190, $200 total. Ultimately, it's going to be a more expensive package. Now, let's talk a little bit about what fields you can use these at. The Echo 1, when I got it, was shooting about 400 to 420 FPS, depending. It's pretty hot. Usually, you're not going to be able to use something shooting that hot at an outdoor field. You're going to have to put like 500 or 1,000 rounds through it to break in the spring. You're going to have to possibly put a softer spring in it. It just really depends. Once you break that spring in, it should be shooting roughly 395, 400, which will be fine for outdoor fields. You just have to put a little bit of ammo through it and break it in. Now, once that's done, this is going to be a fantastic gun. The range on it is really, really good. You're getting probably at least 180 feet minimum with 2.5s or heavier if you really want to use it. I recommend heavier for sure. That's great for a stock $130, $135 gun. That's really good. It's going to definitely outmatch the range on the G&G, but the accuracy I don't feel is quite as consistent. You're using a harder bucking. The accuracy is very good, but just slightly less than the G&G in my opinion. Now, with the G&G Combat Machine series, I've seen these shooting anywhere from 300-ish all the way up to 400-ish, even in the same model gun when you buy it. It's not the greatest thing in the world. This one is shooting roughly 330, 335, which a lot of indoor fields are going to allow that. A lot of indoor fields are 350 FPS limit. Some are 330, in which this will not be okay. You'll have to put a softer spring in it. But if you're playing outdoor, which a lot of people do now, this gun probably won't cut it. You're not going to get the same range as a lot of other guns out there. And there are a lot of other things that go into it. Bucking, barrel, FPS is one, obviously, but we'll talk about that later on as well, especially in the internal section of this video. 335 is not going to quite cut it for outdoor. It might be shooting a little too hot for indoor, so you might end up putting a softer or a harder spring in this right away. Now let's move on to the next section of the review. This is where I talk about the externals of the guns, what I like, what I don't like about them, and the major differences between them. Now, obviously the configurations on each of these guns will be a little bit different. One is wired to the stock and one is wired to the front. We'll cover the differences as we go. Right now I'm going to start with the Echo 1 stock and move my way forward from there in both guns. On the Echo 1 M4 you will have a telescoping crane stock. Now it's adjustable for several positions, so you won't have any problems there as far as your size and how the gun fits you. The gun will have a removable back plate here. The back plate is rubberized, and it does go to your battery compartment. Normally it'll come with a mini type Tamiya connector, but I've already installed Deans on this as I have had this gun for several months now. I find that a crane stock is a slightly more versatile battery compartment than a handguard, which the G&G is wired to. That way you can fit a stick type, a buffer tube type, and potentially other things in here as well. It's a better option for those that just want to have an easier install for the battery. The G&G will simply have a telescoping LE style stock. Now it's adjustable, just like the Echo 1, and it's a little more firm in place, I've noticed. The Echo 1 tends to wobble a little bit more. Being a less expensive gun, the Echo 1 Genesis does come with several less expensive plastic parts. The buffer tube is one of them, and I'll show you others as we go along. The G&G, however, will use a metal buffer tube. Keep in mind that the metal parts on the Combat Machine are not the highest quality metal, although they are metal. Now both the G&G and the Echo 1 are going to have plastic bodies. I noticed that the Echo 1 is a little bit more shiny, the G&G is a little bit more matte, and we'll touch on that as we look at the G&G as well. The Echo 1 will have several plastic parts on the receiver, such as the mag catch, the fake bolt release there, and the selector switch right here as well as the charging handle here. The G&G does have a slightly more matte finish body, and it does have some metal parts that the Echo 1 does not, such as the charging handle, fake bolt catch, mag release, and the selector switch. These are all the same quality metal as the buffer tube. Although both guns do have a removable carry handle, one is a little bit different than the other. The rear sight here on the Echo 1 is not adjustable for windage or elevation. It is simply fixed, but you do have two peep apertures here. They can flip up and down. One is smaller and one is a little bit larger. The G&G, however, is adjustable for windage and elevation, and has the dual peep aperture as well, just like the Echo 1. Both guns do have removable carry handles, therefore you will have a flat top 20mm rail on top of each of them. Just like any standard M4, you can put your own sight, optic, scope, whatever you want on top, so there's no difference there. Now there is a pretty significant difference body-wise between the G&G and the Echo 1. The Echo 1 body pins actually have screw holes on either end. That way, they stay in place pretty easily. Instead, the G&G uses self-retaining pins. The front is actually self-retaining, the rear simply pops out, but it's held in place by pretty good pressure on the gearbox. Now, for players that want the best realism in their gun, they want their charging handle to actually do something when they pull it, just to give them that satisfaction of sound or movement on their gun when that happens. The Echo 1 provides that. When the charging lever is pulled, the fake dust cover will actually drop, and you can see the fake bolt here is retractable. You can then access your hopper just like most standard M4s. The G&G, however, does not have this function. When you pull the charging lever, nothing happens. You do have to get a fingernail in here and open the fake bolt here. Now this is spring shut, but you can hold it open yourself. It does have adjustable hop-up in here, just like a standard M4 or M16. For players wanting the best realism, the Echo One does have a fake gas tube. You can remove your upper heat shield here, and you've got a fake gas tube right here. Now, like most real AR-15s, it is a little bit more shiny, which is kind of a plus for me. The G&G also has this feature. However, you can store your battery in here as well, and we'll get to that in a moment. But the fake gas tube in here just looks a little off. It's not polished, but it works. It's still a fake gas tube, and it gives you that realism. Now, the G&G is wired to the front and uses a standard Type Tamiya connector. The wiring's a little bit thin, but we'll touch on that later in the internals section. The fuse also is a little bit smaller and actually a little bit more difficult to find than a standard fuse. The Echo One itself does not use a fuse. Now, there are some differences into the designs of the outer barrel as well. You'll notice that both guns do have a metal outer barrel, which is a plus. A lot of less expensive guns do come with a plastic barrel. The Echo One, however, has metal barrel. It is a two-piece metal barrel. You do get the piece here that goes into the body itself, and you have the rest of this, which is one piece. The front sight actually goes on over the barrel, which is kind of a plus. It allows you to use the existing outer barrel if you do want to put a rail system or something similar onto the gun. The G&G is a little bit different. This uses a three-piece outer barrel. The section that goes into the receiver itself, a long black tube here, which is just literally a tube when you disassemble it, and the entire piece here, including the front triangle sight and the rest of the outer barrel. That is all one piece. So it's a little bit different. I have had occasional issues with the design, because on each end, the front and the back of this long black tube, it does have two hex keys that push into it, and that holds the barrel together. I have occasionally had those come loose. Sadly, the front sight on the Echo One is not adjustable for windage like most other airsoft guns are. The G&G, oddly enough, is the same way. The entire outer barrel and front sight assembly are one piece, and the elevation is not adjustable as well. Both guns will have a front sling loop. However, the Echo One does not have a rear sling loop, something you might have to add on later. The G&G, however, does have a front and a rear sling loop, giving you the ability right out of the box to use a sling. The Echo One M4 does come with a really interesting plastic flash hider. It is compatible with certain suppressors on the market, so that kind of gives you an addability as far as suppressors go right out of the box. Now, the G&G will have a plastic flash hider as well. Keep in mind that both flash hiders will be blaze orange out of the box when you get them. Now, I was actually playing a little bit the other day with the Echo One in an indoor field, and I realized it's not a very loud gun when you're running around. It's actually pretty quiet considering. Now, going indoor, you're not as worried about stealth or anything like that. But when you're outdoor, it's a little bit more necessary to be quiet, concealed, things like that. If you're walking around on branches and you're trying to be quiet, and you got baddies around you you're trying to light up, you want a quieter gun. The G&G, I noticed, is a louder gun when you're running around. It's a lot of wobble. Your sling loop wobbles around, your mag's going to wobble a lot, your stock even makes some noise, which is not the greatest thing in the world. Now, the Echo One, quieter gun. Everything but the mag well and the mag is actually pretty quiet. Your front sling loop isn't wiggling around, your stock isn't jiggling around making a lot of noise. If you're outdoors, out of the box, this is going to be a better gun for you because it shoots farther, it shoots hotter, and it's a lot quieter. Now let's move on to the internal review section of this video. This is where I take both guns apart and I get really nitpicky about the internals. This is going to be a little bit longer than the externals, so for a lot of information, sit back and enjoy. Now, both of these guns you're quite familiar with are both M4 style guns. If just a random person off the street who doesn't know anything about airsoft looks at these guns and they're like, okay, they look really similar, I can't tell a difference. The internals of these guns are what really sets them apart. So before we actually start talking about the gearboxes, which I think are by far the most interesting parts of these guns, I've got several points I want to touch on that are outside the gearbox. We're also going to touch on the motors, the hop-ups, the barrels, things like that. But I've got several other small things I want to touch on, so we're going to start there before we get to the gearboxes. Now, this is something I really wish a lot of companies would start doing. G&G's been doing it for a while, and I really like it. There's just the pistol grip on the left, and you can see how it has the brass screw holes here. Oftentimes, I do have those strip out, and sometimes it's kind of a pain to replace, a pistol grip every 6 months or a year. It's a good $20 sometimes, and it's money I'd love to save and put elsewhere. The Echo One doesn't do that, so I think G&G really has a leg up on them right there. Now, the buffer tubes on these, obviously the G&G on the left is metal, the Echo One on the right is plastic. Now, what Echo One did is they used a screw and kind of a 3-cross piece to help hold the buffer tube in. Now you can see there's a large kind of punched out hole in the buffer tube there. That did not come with it. I did actually punch that out a little bit so I could fit a Dean's connector through there. That's the only reason. Yours is going to be pristine when you get it, guarantee that. The G&G actually doesn't use anything. It's just got a screw hole in the back, and it's one piece, and you get the screw there. It's kind of a good design, but if you ever do want to wire it out the back, you actually end up needing to buy a different buffer tube, which, shoot, that can cost $20, $40, depends on what brand you get. Or if you really want to try to drill a hole through there to fit a wire, it's going to be a complete pain. So I think Echo One kind of wins this. Now, obviously, I'm kind of doing G&G on the left, Echo One on the right. And it's pretty obvious which one came from Echo One as it is. Now, I'm going to be totally honest here. I'm kind of mixed feelings about these motors. I like the Echo One significantly more than the G&G. The rate of fire is better. It doesn't heat up nearly as fast. I've noticed it has a lot more torque potentially. It can pull actually a fairly heavy spring considering. The G&G is kind of limited at like a 110, 120 before it really starts to heat up fast. That's the main problem with the G&G is that the motor heats up quickly and it's not something I like at all. Now the G&G pinion on the left is actually an O-hole. That's something I really like. It makes it a lot easier to swap out. If you go over to the Echo One on the right here, you'll notice that it does use a D-hole. Both the pinions are actually great quality. I'm probably never going to have a problem with them because both are shooting under 400 FPS. They're shooting great still. I wish I had the ability to swap that out a little bit easier. Both hop-ups are actually made of plastic. The G&G, the gray and green one on the left, works pretty well. It's a little bit more stiff than the Echo One, which is on the right, and I'll talk about that in a second. The G&G here, it's pretty stiff. The adjustment on it is pretty positive. Neither hop-up clicks very positively at all. They don't click at all, actually. It's just more of kind of a very stiff turn on the wheel there. Now, the adjustment wheel on the Echo One here is a little bit more loose. I do recommend putting maybe Teflon tape or some kind of O-ring or something under that to help keep it in place a little bit better. Now, something that the Echo One has that I think is a really awesome touch, it's practically pennies, but it makes a world of a difference sometimes. It's the fact that the Echo One has a spring here. It sits on the front of the hop up there, just on a little pin, and it helps keep the hop up pushed against the gearbox so you can get a more consistent air seal. Sometimes that can make a world of a difference. I've actually had G&Gs, they don't include that spring at all, and I've had them completely lose consistency. They'll shoot 30 FPS hotter one shot, 40 less the other. It just really depends sometimes. Now the Echo One does come with the Mad Bull orange bucking. That's something that's just excellent. I don't feel it's quite as accurate as the G&G bucking. I really do like their G&G green bucking, but I tend to get just better range, oddly enough, with a Mad Bull orange bucking. Now that partly does help with the brass barrel, and I'll touch on that in a second here. Also, you'll notice that it does come with a plastic washer spacer here. Like I said, you do get more plastic parts on the Echo One, but I've honestly never had a problem with using a plastic spacer there instead of a brass one. Now, the G&G green bucking here, it does really well. It's a much softer bucking, so it's kind of a different, it gives you different results, really. I feel like you do get better consistency as far as accuracy with it, but you just simply don't get the range. And that's partially due to the gun's FPS as well, but the bucking does kind of play into that a little bit as well. You'll notice you do get the brass washer here, and I kind of like that touch a little bit too. It moves a little bit more easily, which I don't like. Sometimes you can hear it actually rocking back and forth in the gun, which is a little bit annoying to me. Now here's where the Echo One really makes a difference. You might just see a barrel on your screen, but to be honest, the performance is massively different. The G&G on the left is an unpolished aluminum barrel, and that's really where the gun suffers from range and accuracy as well, and it just doesn't do as well with that barrel. You obviously can't upgrade it. They're not super expensive. $30 to $60 will get you a fantastic barrel. That's still more money you have to put into your gun out of the box. You'll notice it's not crowned at all here. It's cut and it's shaved down a little bit so you can see it's a clean cut still, but it just doesn't cut it. Pardon the pun. And the Echo One here, it's a world of a difference. You do get a brass barrel. It's a 606 bore, and it helps a little bit there. It's actually about an inch longer than the G&G barrel as well. Now we can actually move on to the hearts of the guns, the gearbox. Now before I actually open these up, I'm just going to talk about what we visually see here. A, the wiring, B, the gearbox shells, a couple other small things as well. Something that Echo One does here is they kind of go from a thinner, stiffer wiring to something that's a little bit thinner and softer. And this is really for being able to manipulate that wiring in your buffer tube. It makes it a little bit easier. Obviously, like I said earlier, this will come with a mini type Tamiya connector. I already installed the Deans on here. And this is kind of nice. It gives you a little more versatility there as far as just ease of use, essentially. And you've got quick disconnect pins under this heat shrink here. Now your G&G, the wiring is actually a little bit thinner than the Echo One wiring. And if you actually had thicker wiring in this, it'd be a lot nicer. This gets the job done well enough, but just the gun would benefit significantly from having thicker wiring. Now this is something I really like about the G&G gearbox, and I wish other companies would really start doing it more often. Now I've seen occasional Echo One guns have it, but not very consistently. G&G actually radiuses the front of their gearbox shell. Now this can help cut down stress during every shot fired on your gearbox shell. That can help prevent it from cracking in a short period of time. Make your gearbox essentially last longer. But we move over to the Echo One gearbox and the game changes a little bit. The gearbox is not radiused, but I'm semi-convinced they actually took a cow and transmuted that to metal somehow and actually put it in here, because this thing is beefy. You've got kind of like just solid metal here on the top and bottom. It's obviously not radiused, but this gearbox shell will ultimately last longer than the G&G you see on the right side here. It's just really thick. You could put a pretty heavy spring on here and it's going to last a long time, which is something I really like about the Echo One gearbox. Now this is just kind of a minor thing. It doesn't really make a huge difference, but if you're working on guns a lot and you're having to work on this particular gun a lot, it's kind of a pain. You'll notice that the Echo One has the screws on the right side of the gearbox. This is kind of the norm for any standard gearbox, right? The G&G actually has them on the opposite side. So when you're reassembling this, you end up having to just, it's a pain. Put your gearbox back together, then flip it over and do that. It's a little bit different. Now the Echo One also has something really convenient. This little port here allows you to stick probably like an Allen key or some other small spoke like that into the gearbox and actually undo your anti-reversal latch. This will decycle your gearbox and allow you to open it up without anything popping out really. The G&G just doesn't have that feature, so you end up having to put a screwdriver or some kind of pick into the hole right here where the pinion goes in and you pull your anti-reversal latch. It's a little more a pain to do. So now I've got both gearboxes opened up. You can see, they're both very similar in as far as design, function, a lot of the same things. They're both version 2, they're both, 3-gear driven, they both have air compression systems. So what's super different about them? That's where it gets interesting. So I'm going to dive right in here and we're going to get talking about these. But first of all, let me note, I have had the Echo One Genesis quite a bit longer than the G&G. So I have had the chance to shim that and a few other things. I haven't corrected AOE on it because I haven't really seen the need a whole lot. I've been running a softer spring in it, but for this review I have dropped the heavier spring in it. So that one, a little bit of different tuning from when you'll get it originally. So there are a lot of differences inside of these guns. We're just going to start with some of the more major ones I think here. You can see the G&G here does come with these copper 8mm bushings, and I'm not super thrilled about these. It's a softer metal and these can bore out over time, and obviously it is less expensive to use these kinds of bushings than say steel or bearings or something like that. So this is kind of a drawback to me. If you're going to go with one of these guns, I say swap those out. That'd probably be the first thing I'd swap out. Now our Echo One here actually uses some pretty decent quality 8mm bearings. I like these a lot. They're actually very smooth and they make it quite a bit easier to shim. Sometimes those G&G 8mm bushings can be a little bit of a pain to shim with, I've noticed. Now obviously the grease quality in each one differs a little bit. The G&G you get kind of a milky white grease. It's not very consistently applied. It's not the greatest in the world, but it does its job and it lubricates the gear teeth and the piston and whatnot. Now the Echo One actually has much better grease distribution than the G&G. The G&G simply doesn't have enough grease in it to really do its job. The Echo One, it's pretty generously applied. You do get the green kind of toothpaste looking grease in there. And there's quite a bit of it in there, and it's where it needs to be, not on weird, odd, random things. It's more on dynamic moving parts than just random things like say a little bit of wiring or parts of things that really don't move. Now, the spring guides in both of these, they're actually not bad at all. The G&G just uses a metal spring guide here. There's really nothing super special about it. There's no washer under here or anything. It's metal. It's not going to break anytime soon. Now, our Echo 1 spring guide here is actually a version 3 guide, even though it's in a version 2 gearbox. I noticed Echo 1's been doing that quite a bit, and it's kind of nice, I suppose. Nothing super cool, nothing super bad about it. This one is a metal shaft, metal base, and it has bearings. It offers a little bit more compression, and it allows your spring to twist when it's moving, so that's a very good thing right there. The two springs, they're actually very similar looking. The G&G is, it's not really oil tempered at all. It's very rough, dry spring, and it does have some heavily coiled sections here. Now I noticed even with these more coiled sections and about a half an inch length increase compared to the Echo 1, you're actually getting about 70 to 80 FPS less with this spring, which is not really that great. This Echo 1 spring, you'll notice it does have a slightly more heavily coiled portion at the bottom, and I noticed we're getting about 400 to 420 FPS out of this spring, so that's a pretty good power spring right there. It's about a half an inch shorter, and it fits in the gearbox a little bit well. The G&G I do have to compress more, as it's a little bit more of a pain to install in the gun. Now with the G&G, we're just going to start with the piston and the air compression system here. Has a ported plastic piston head, so that's good. Helps with the air seal, and this one tends to get a pretty good air seal in the cylinder. Has the second last tooth removed, which can help in other things, including angle of engagement and correcting it. And it's got one metal tooth here. And you'll notice the rails are untrimmed, they are full rails, they're not speed rails or anything like that. The Echo 1 piston and piston head are pretty similar. This one has a slightly concaved piston head, still ported, and it gets a slightly better air seal in the Echo 1 than the G&G. One metal tooth, and the second to last tooth has not been removed, but that's really not a big deal. You can always do that yourself if you need to. And it does not have speed rails either. The cylinder and cylinder head on the G&G I feel are kind of misleading. When you look at it in the gearbox, just inside of it, fully assembled, you'll think, okay, it's got a full aluminum cylinder. Nope, it's actually got a port here, and it's a little too far forward for the barrel length, and that's one thing I really don't like about the G&Gs. It's also partially why the gun does not get a higher speed than it does when you're at the chronograph. So the port is facing down. I don't like that. That's kind of annoying. The cylinder head actually gets a great air seal in there, which is good. It's very tight. It's got one O-ring here, made of plastic, nothing super special about it. Decent damper in there. And when I reassemble this, I'll have the port facing to the right side like it usually is. And I really wish G&G wouldn't do this where they made aluminum cylinders. It's a little disconcerting. I feel like they're cutting corners that they probably don't need to there as far as cost and parts quality. Now, you can move the port back just a little bit here, maybe half an inch, quarter inch, and it'd help the FPS dramatically. Now the Echo 1, it's not bad at all. It's full Type 0 cylinder, no ports. It's pretty heavy metal, which I really, really like. That's a big plus for me. The cylinder head doesn't get quite the same seal in here, so you might want to use Teflon tape or something along those lines to get it to seal a little bit better. It does have a thicker O-ring here, which is nice, and the pad is actually a little bit bigger and slightly softer. And it's just a standard cylinder head aside from that. Now the G&G's nozzle and tappet plate are nothing super special. The nozzle has no O-ring in here, but it gets a decent enough air seal. And it's kind of got the triangular shape at the front, which tends to be pretty standard for nozzles these days. The tappet plate's pretty stiff. Could be a little bit more flexible. The plastic there is pretty tough, but it does its job all right. Now something really different about the Echo 1 tappet plate is because your gearbox is quite a bit more beefy, you do end up having these cutouts here. And if you happen to break your tappet plate, which is pretty unlikely because it's actually very flexible and tends to do, it feels really, really nice for a tappet plate actually. You would have to sand those down to replace your tappet plate. So not a big deal, it's just a little more work. Your nozzle is also the same plastic as the tappet plate, I believe. No O-ring in there, and gets actually a pretty good air seal, and it's still got a little bit of that triangular design at the front, but not too much. Now, your G&G gear set, pretty good quality, very tough. I can't really go say anything bad about them. They're really on par with the Echo 1s that we actually have in the other gearbox here as well, so nothing really bad I can say. The shimming on these is very ratio based. I noticed that I've owned enough of these over time that they actually do give kind of a stock ratio on the gears. Like they'll put this shim here, etc. on every single gun they put out. So it's very just out of the factory, no special tuning. The shimming is not awful. It's decent. There's quite a bit of play in the axial play on the shafts when you actually check it out for yourself. But the gun actually sounds pretty decent out of the box. Not bad at all. Now, like I said with the Echo One, I did go ahead and shim this a while back, and the shimming's holding up really well. But the stock shim job, same idea. They do kind of have a ratio out of the factory shimming that they do, and it does all right. I will admit the G&G sounded a little bit better out of the box, but these gears are great quality as well. The little tappet spoke here that picks up the tappet plate every time the sector gear goes around is a little bit bigger, so that can help potentially a little bit with feeding. But the gears are excellent quality, honestly the same quality, same strength, same durability just about as the G&G gear set. Now something I really like about the Echo One is the fact that it gets fantastic contact between the trigger shuttle and the trigger contacts. That is one of the highlights of this gearbox, I think. It is advertised as being, LiPo ready. I don't like that term a whole lot because it is kind of misleading. I really recommend running 7.4 LiPos on most stock guns, not 11.1. That's not always great. But, like I said, I did run an 11.1 on this gun since I got it, and really nothing else, and I've had zero issues, and the contacts still look practically brand new. The G&G trigger contacts they look a little bit nicer, but I've noticed they don't run a LiPo quite as well as the Echo One contacts there, nor does it make the same quality contact with the shuttle as it does the trigger contacts. It does well, it looks good, it just doesn't perform as well in my opinion. Now both of these gearboxes are excellent quality. I like them both a lot. They're both very well made, and they're pretty good out of the box. But I really feel like the Echo One has a leg up on the G&G just for a few small reasons. The trigger contacts, the gearbox shell, the bearing spring guide, things like that. I think it has a little bit more potential, and it's going to be a better out-of-the-box gun for a beginner player, a loaner gun. They're just going to like it better as far as their performance. Same goes for the hop up and the barrel and things like that. I really feel like the Echo One, just because of that bucking in the barrel, really beats out the G&G. I think the G&G does have better accuracy, but the Echo One essentially has a much better range, and a new player or loaner gun or someone who's just getting into airsoft is really going to enjoy being able to reach out and touch someone 180, 200 feet away instead of, say, 140 feet. It makes them feel a little bit better on the field, and they're going to have a lot more fun. Now, lastly, as far as the internals go, I really think the Echo One motor is a little bit nicer than the G&G. Doesn't heat up nearly as fast, slightly better rate of fire, and it's just a little bit better motor overall. Alright, so we covered the externals of the gun. I talked about all the little nitpicky things I like to talk about in guns. Talked about the internals. I opened up both guns and showed you everything inside of them. Ultimately, it's up to you guys to decide which gun is better for you. They're both pretty nice guns. I like the Echo One for its inexpensive cost, the range on it, and the fact that it's a little bit quieter gun. But I also like the G&G for the fact that it does have a few more metal parts. It's a little bit nicer externals, and it was a little bit quieter out of the box when I got it. So, which one would you guys pick? Put it in the comments below. I'm actually really curious to know. Thanks for watching. I'm Prodigy from Kilo23. Take it easy, guys.